Hey guys, tonight we begin with something that history tried to sanitize, that textbooks reduce to dates and names, and that we're finally understanding as raw, complicated human drama. For men, one island nation, a century of blood that literally rewrote what was possible. The Sengoku period Japan, the age of warring states, and the four masters who shaped it with ambition, brilliance, and a willingness to sacrifice everything, including themselves, to reshape the world. Before we settle into this story, take a moment to subscribe. Yeah, this one matters. Now dim the lights, get comfortable, settle into somewhere safe, and let's step into a world where loyalty meant death, where innovation meant survival, and where for ordinary men became legends not because of luck, but because they understood something fundamental about power, change, and what it costs to transform a nation. Like and subscribe to our channel, and comment also. You're about to enter the internal world of men who lived during Japan's most violent period. This wasn't honorable warfare in the way samurai are often romanticized in modern culture. This was messy, desperate, brilliant warfare. Men fighting not just for territory, but for the right to shape the future itself. And four specific individuals: Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, Tokugawa Ieyasu, and Yusuji Kenshin, who understood, better than anyone around them, that the only way to survive a changing world was to change faster than your enemies expected. The irony, and there's profound irony here, is that these four men were products of chaos. They didn't create the Sengoku period. They were created by it. Japan in the mid-1500s was fragmenting. The centralized feudal system that had held power for centuries was collapsing under its own weight. Regional warlords called daimyo were becoming independent powers, each one claiming authority that had previously flowed downward from the shogun. And into this chaos, this absolute consuming chaos, stepped men who weren't content with just surviving it. They wanted to reshape it completely. They wanted to burn down the old system and build something new from the ashes. Pause. Imagine this. It's 1467. The year is less important than the context. The shogun, the military ruler of Japan who has been in power for generations, whose authority has been unquestioned since childhood, whose family name has meant power and dominance for centuries, is becoming irrelevant. Not slowly, not gradually, but in real time, losing power, losing authority, becoming a figurehead while actual power drains away like water through a broken vessel. His authority is hollow. His power is fading. His commands are ignored. And in the vacuum of that fading power, something terrible and magnificent is emerging. Absolute fragmentation. Regional warlords are declaring independence. They're fighting each other with desperation and innovation. They're consolidating smaller territories into larger ones. They're competing for dominance not just in their own regions, but across the entire nation. They're beginning to understand that whoever controls the most territory, whoever can organize the most soldiers, whoever can innovate the fastest, that person might be able to unify the nation. This process, this transformation, will take decades. It will result in hundreds of thousands of deaths. Entire families will be eliminated. Generations will be wiped out. Regions will be depopulated. It will completely reshape Japanese society, culture, government, and philosophy. And into this chaos, this absolute consuming, terrifying chaos, step four men who aren't going to manage it or adapt to it. They're going to completely transform it. Pause. The story we're about to tell you requires understanding one fundamental thing. Change is violence. It's not gentle. It's not comfortable. It's not something that happens gradually and easily over time. Real, transformative change, the kind of change that reshapes entire nations, always involves rupture. It always involves the destruction of existing orders. It always involves blood. The Sengoku period was when Japan learned this lesson in the most brutal way possible. Over approximately 150 years, from about 1467 to 1615, the nation transformed completely. The feudal system that had organized Japanese society for centuries began to break down. The central authority that had maintained some level of stability began to fragment. And into that fragmentation stepped our four masters. These four men are not famous in the way that some historical figures are famous. Most modern people, If they know anything about samurai history, know about the 47 Ronin. They know about famous samurai like Miyamoto Musashi. They might know about the ninja, but they often don't know about Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, Tokugawa Ieyasu, and Yusuji Kenshin, despite these four men having more profound impact on Japanese history than almost any other individuals. Let me tell you why they matter. Let me tell you why their story is not just historical curiosity, but something that reveals fundamental truths about power, ambition, and what it means to transform the world. When Nobunaga came to power in the 1550s, Japan was effectively a failed state. There was no central government with real power. The shogun existed as a figurehead. The real power lay with hundreds of daimyo, regional warlords, who fought each other constantly. Trade was dangerous. Travel was dangerous. There was no stability. There was no predictability. There was only chaos. By the time Tokugawa Ieyasu died in 1616, Japan was unified. The constant warfare had ended. The daimyo were brought under control. Central authority had been established. Stability had returned. Commerce could happen safely. Culture could flourish. It wasn't a perfect system, and it certainly involved tremendous violence and suffering. But the transformation was real, and it was profound. The four masters did this. Not alone, they had subordinates, advisors, soldiers, systems. But these four men provided the vision, the leadership, the willingness to make the difficult decisions that made unification possible. What's remarkable is that these were not men born to be leaders. Nobunaga was considered a fool by his own family. Hideyoshi was born a peasant. Ieyasu was a hostage. Kenshin was a monk. None of them had the background you would typically expect for someone who would reshape an entire nation. But they all had something else. They all understood that the world was changing. They all recognized that the old rules weren't working anymore. They all had the courage to try something different. And they all had the patience to see change through, even when that change cost hundreds of thousands of lives. This is what we're going to explore tonight. Not the simple military history, but the internal experience of being one of these men. What it felt like to understand something about the future that no one else understood. What it felt like to make decisions that affected millions. What it cost to be the architect of transformation. Pause. What we're going to do over the next 2 hours is something unusual. We're not going to follow conventional history. We're not going to march through dates and battles in chronological order like a textbook. Instead, we're going to enter the minds of these four men at different moments in their lives. We're going to understand why they made the choices they made. We're going to see the internal cost of their ambition. We're going to feel the weight of their decisions. And we're going to understand something that history books don't quite capture, that these weren't cartoon villains or heroes. They were humans, complicated and brilliant and flawed, trying to solve impossible problems with the tools available to them. Oda Nobunaga was born into a minor daimyo family, not destined for power, not positioned to reshape history, not the eldest son of a powerful house, which would have made succession clear and obvious, just a kid who was considered somewhat difficult, somewhat stubborn, somewhat too willing to question the way things had always been done. His family called him the Fool of Owari. Can you imagine? Your own family naming you a fool. Growing up with that label, that weight, that constant sense that people expected you to fail. His father died when he was young, and people wondered if he would destroy the family territory or preserve it. Toyotomi Hideyoshi was born into poverty so complete that samurai status was literally impossible for him. He wasn't born into a warrior family. He was born into nothing. Absolutely nothing. He was a peasant's son, which meant his entire life was predetermined to be agricultural labor, or perhaps servitude, or if he was unlucky, slavery. There was no path from where he was born to anywhere else. There was no mechanism for someone from his background to ever achieve power or status. And yet, somehow he found one. Somehow, this peasant son would rise to become one of the most powerful men in Japan. He would become the one who completes what Nobunaga starts. Tokugawa Ieyasu was born as a hostage, literally held as a bargaining chip between rival powers. Imagine being a child and understanding that your existence is purely instrumental, that you're valuable only insofar as you can be used as leverage in a negotiation. He learned early that nothing was secure and everything could change at any moment. He learned that survival meant being adaptable, patient, and willing to wait longer than anyone else for the right moment to act. He learned that sometimes the person who moves last wins a game. Yusuji Kenshin was different. He was born into power, born into a strong daimyo family. He had everything a young samurai could want, and yet he chose to become a Buddhist monk instead. He was studying philosophy, studying Buddhist texts, living a life of contemplation and spiritual discipline, and then warfare required him to return to his family duties. He had to reconcile the spiritual discipline of Buddhism with the violence of warfare, and he never quite managed to make peace with that contradiction. He carried both identities, the monk and the warlord, for his entire life, and this internal contradiction made him, in some ways, the most interesting of the four. These weren't destined leaders. They were people who recognized that the world was changing and that adaptation, real, radical adaptation, was the only path to survival. And as they adapted, they dragged Japan along with them. They forced the nation to transform. They made change inevitable. Pause. The blood comes later. The blood is the literal cost of all this innovation and ambition. But first, we need to understand something more fundamental. We need to understand what it felt like to live in a world where the old rules weren't working anymore, where every assumption you've been taught was becoming wrong in real time, where the only thing you could be certain of was uncertainty. This is what the Sengoku period felt like. Imagine being born into a world of order, where everything is ruled by the shogun, where power flows downward in predictable hierarchies, where your future is determined by your birth. Your birth determines everything. Your family name determines your status. Your position in society is written before you even understand what a position is. You know where you'll be in 30 years. You know what your responsibilities are. You know the rules. Then, slowly, that order starts breaking down. The shogun becomes irrelevant. Local warlords start declaring independence. They stop acknowledging the shogun's authority. They stop sending tribute. They stop accepting orders. Battles begin, not the formal, ritualized battles of earlier periods, where honor and ceremony mattered more than victory, but desperate, violent, increasingly sophisticated warfare. Cavalry strategies that don't work anymore because of new weapons. Tactics that fail because the enemy has adapted faster than you have. Assumptions that get you killed because they're no longer valid. This is the world these four men entered, and they understood with crystal clarity that the only way forward was through complete innovation, new weapons, new tactics, new ways of organizing power, new ways of thinking about what loyalty meant and what ambition could achieve. They understood that the old way, the traditional way, the way that had worked for centuries, was ending, and whoever adapted fastest would own the future. The blood, literal, physical blood, becomes the cost of this transformation. Men dying not for honor, but for territory. Soldiers suffering injuries that become infected in medieval Japanese medicine, leading to death from what would be minor wounds in modern times. Families destroyed because their daimyo chose the wrong side in a conflict. Generations wiped out. Entire lineages eliminated. All of this happens during the century these four masters are operating, and it's the foundation of their success. The blood is real. The suffering is real. The cost is real. But here's the remarkable part that historians are only now really understanding. The four masters themselves were deeply aware of this cost. They knew what they were sacrificing. They knew what their ambitions would cost everyone around them. They weren't ignorant of the blood they would shed. They weren't deluded about what unification would require. And they made a choice to pursue it anyway, not because they were evil, but because they understood something about human progress that most people never understand. Meaningful change is always violent. It always costs. It always requires someone to bear the suffering, while others benefit from the transformation. Pause. This is the story we're telling tonight. Not a glorification of samurai, or of warfare, or of ambition, but an honest examination of what it looked like to live through chaos and emerge transformed on the other side. What it looked like to make decisions that affected millions. What it felt like to know that your legacy would be written in blood, but that it might also transform the world. What it meant to be one of the four masters of the Sengoku period. Are you ready to enter this world? Are you comfortable? Then let's begin. You wake before dawn. This is habit. Mostly, the discipline of a man who's learned that the early hours are the only time when the world is quiet enough to think clearly. Your eyes open in the darkness, and for a moment, there's a silence that feels absolute. No servants moving through the halls. No soldiers preparing for training. No messengers arriving with reports. Just the silence of a fortress before dawn. Your sleeping quarters are sparse. Stone, wood, and fabric. Nothing unnecessary. You've never trusted luxury, even now that you have the resources to afford it. Luxury is what makes people soft. Luxury is what makes them forget that the world can turn violent at any moment. There's a low table, a few cushions, a shelf with books and maps. Nothing more. The air is cold. It's autumn in 1559, and you're in Nagoya in the Owari region. The word Nagoya will mean something different 5 centuries from now, but right now, it's just a castle, your castle, the one you inherited even though everyone expected you to fail at controlling it. The morning air carries the smell with smoke from the kitchens, of damp earth, of the specific scent that fortifications carry, a combination of stone, moss, and the sweat of soldiers who've been sleeping in close quarters. Pause. You're in your early 30s, though the hardship of this era ages people quickly. Your face is lined. There are creases around your eyes from squinting at maps and studying battle formations. Your hands are scarred from years of swordplay, from learning the weapons that will dominate the coming battles. You're not particularly tall. You're not particularly handsome. You're not particularly good at the kinds of courtly manners that other daimyo use to maintain social position. People have mentioned this throughout your life. Your father noticed it. Your advisors have pointed it out. The minor warlords in neighboring territories have used it as evidence that you're not a serious threat. This has been a problem throughout your life. People expected more from your position. They expected elegance, dignity, the refinement that comes with high birth. They expected someone who understood the traditional way of doing things, who respected hierarchy, who accepted that the world had been ordered a certain way and would continue in that way forever. Instead, they got you. Direct, blunt, intelligent about practical matters, less interested in aesthetics than in effectiveness, willing to question traditions that don't make sense, willing to experiment with new weapons that violate the samurai code, willing to reorganize military structure in ways that ignore centuries of precedent. You rise from the sleeping mat and move through the darkness. Your servants would be horrified if they knew you were moving about without help, without ceremony. But you prefer these early morning hours alone. In these hours, you can think without the constant pressure of people waiting for your decisions. The castle around you is beginning to fill with the sounds and rhythms of the working day. You can hear soldiers moving to the courtyards below. You can hear the metallic sounds of the blacksmiths starting their work. You can hear the kitchens beginning to prepare food for hundreds of people. The fortress is a living organism and operates on rhythms that you've carefully designed. You've spent years creating these rhythms. In a traditional samurai castle, things would happen more loosely. People would move according to habit, according to tradition, according to the natural flow of the day. But you've discovered something powerful: efficiency. If you can create systems that anticipate needs, that coordinate movement, that ensure that every soldier knows their role and can execute it without hesitation, you can achieve remarkable things. Pause. The morning continues with briefings from your various commanders. One reports on the training of the new recruits. They're progressing faster than expected. Another reports on the status of your firearms manufacturing. The production is ahead of schedule. A third reports on intelligence gathering about the neighboring daimyo. There's a small warlord to the east who's considering making a move against your territory. This is useful information. You can begin planning your response now, before any direct threat emerges. This is where your genius lies, not in the flash of the moment, not in the drama of battle, but in the careful preparation, in the anticipation of problems before they become problems, in the creation of systems that can respond to challenges with minimum delay. By mid-morning, you're conducting a training session with your elite guards. These are the soldiers who will be closest to you in battle. They need to understand your methods completely. They need to be able to respond to your commands without hesitation. They need to trust that you understand what you're doing, Even when your orders seem to violate traditional military wisdom, you work with them on a specific tactic, the integrated rifle and spear formation. The idea is simple but revolutionary. Traditional tactics would have archers providing range support while spearmen formed the primary force. You're proposing something different. Firearms as a primary range weapon, but integrated with spear formations in a coordinated way that maximizes both the firepower of the rifles and the defensive capabilities of the spears. Your soldiers practice this formation over and over. They load, they fire, they move, they reposition, they reform. The repetition is intentional. You want this to become muscle memory. You want this to be something that they can do without thinking about it, without needing constant orders, without requiring a commander to be present to tell them what to do. This is another revolutionary concept for samurai warfare. Traditional military organization emphasizes the role of the commander, the person who makes decisions and whose presence is essential to maintaining coordination. You're trying to create an organization where people can function effectively even without direct supervision, where they've been trained so thoroughly that they understand the principles behind the tactics and can adapt them to changing circumstances. By afternoon, you've exhausted yourself. Your body is aching. Your mind is tired. You've been making decisions since before dawn, and there are still hours of the day remaining. There are reports to read. There are strategic discussions to have with your senior counselors. There are decisions to make about resource allocation, about where to deploy your forces, about how to position yourself for the conflicts you know are coming. You take a brief rest. Not sleep. There's no time for sleep during the day, but a moment of stillness where you can gather your energy for the remaining hours of work. You drink more tea. You eat something simple. You allow your mind to wander for a few minutes before returning to the work. By evening, you're reviewing maps. The geography of your region is becoming clearer in your mind. You can see the vulnerabilities in your territory. You can see where the natural defensive positions are. You can see where a clever enemy might try to attack. And you're positioning your forces accordingly, not just to respond to threats that currently exist, but to prevent threats from emerging in the first place. Pause. This is visionary thinking. Though you would never use that word about yourself. You're simply being practical. You're looking at the realities of your situation and trying to organize your forces and your territory in ways that maximize your advantages and minimize your vulnerabilities. As the sun sets, you're exhausted. This is the price of leadership. This is the cost of trying to think several moves ahead of your enemies. This is what it means to be the kind of leader who doesn't just react to events, but tries to anticipate them and shape them. Tomorrow will bring new challenges. Tomorrow will bring new decisions. Tomorrow, like every day in this era, will require you to be smarter, faster, more innovative than your competitors. But tonight, as the darkness falls, you can allow yourself a moment of rest, knowing that you've done the work that needs to be done, that you prepared as well as you can, and that you're ready for whatever comes next. The guns are the future. You know this with absolute certainty. You've seen Portuguese firearms, clumsy and unreliable though they are. You've tested them. You've studied them. You've begun training your soldiers to use them. And you understand, in a way that most of your contemporaries don't, that these weapons represent a fundamental break with everything that samurai warfare has been. You're standing in a workshop now, watching a craftsman work on rifle components. The workshop is underground, partially hidden, protected from casual observation. The craftsman is half Portuguese, half Japanese, someone who somehow found his way to your domain and who understands both the technology and the cultural context. He's explaining something about barrel thickness and pressure, about how Japanese metalworking techniques can potentially improve the reliability of firearms. You're listening with the intensity of someone who understands that this knowledge might be the difference between victory and defeat. The metalwork here is remarkable. Japanese swordsmiths have been refining their craft for centuries. The process of heating metal, folding it, understanding how to achieve the right carbon content, the right hardness, the right balance between brittleness and flexibility. All of this knowledge exists in Japanese metalworking. Now, those same skills are being applied to firearm manufacturing. The result is weapons that are better than the Portuguese originals, more reliable, better balanced, more effective in the hands of trained soldiers. The workshop is deeper underground than most people realize. You've had it expanded over months, carefully removing stone so that the work area is hidden from casual observation. The ceiling is low. You have to duck as you move through, but it's intentional. The low ceiling helps with heat retention. It helps keep the sound of the work from traveling too far above ground. It's one of many small design decisions that create the conditions for this work to continue undetected. You move through the various stations of the workshop, observing the different stages of firearm production. At one station, a craftsman is working on barrel making. The process is meticulous. A metal rod is placed in a fire, heated until it's soft enough to work. Then it's hammered into shape carefully, with precise strikes that create the barrel walls to exactly the right thickness. Too thin, and the barrel will burst when the gun is fired. Too thick, and the gun becomes too heavy to use effectively. The balance point is narrow, and it requires tremendous skill to achieve it consistently. Pause. You watch this work for a while, not saying anything, just observing. You've learned that sometimes the most important thing a leader can do is simply pay attention. When craftspeople know that their work matters to the leadership, when they know that someone important is paying attention to the details of their work, they perform better. They care more. They take pride in what they're doing. At another station, ammunition is being produced. Balls of lead are being cast, each one roughly the size of a walnut, each one needing to be perfectly round so that it will fire accurately from the rifle barrels. The lead is heated in a large pot. The molten metal is poured into molds. The cooled metal is then carefully smoothed and inspected. Defective ammunition is melted down and used again. Usable ammunition is stored in carefully organized racks. You pick up a finished bullet, feeling its weight in your hand. It's warm from the recent production. It's so simple, just lead shaped into a sphere, but it represents hours of work. It represents the integration of Portuguese technology with Japanese craftsmanship. It represents the future of warfare. Pause. At another station, soldiers are being trained in the maintenance and repair of firearms. They're learning how to clean the barrels, how to remove built-up residue from the firing process. They're learning how to replace broken components. They're learning how to keep the weapon functioning properly even after extended use. This training is crucial. A firearm that's properly maintained can be more reliable than one that's constantly breaking down. You realize something important as you observe this training. The people who are learning this maintenance will become the experts in their units. They'll be the ones who can troubleshoot problems. They'll be the ones who can keep the firearms functioning even in less than ideal circumstances. By training them thoroughly, you're creating a network of expertise that will spread throughout your army. By mid-afternoon, you're in a different part of the workshop, looking at designs for new types of firearms. Portuguese designs are good, but you believe they can be improved. You're working with designers to create variations that might be more effective. Maybe a shorter barrel for better maneuverability. Maybe a different mechanism for loading. Maybe an integrated sight system that allows for better accuracy. These are not massive innovations. They're incremental improvements. But incremental improvements across an entire system can add up to significant advantages. Pause. A messenger arrives with a report. One of your scouts has spotted what might be Portuguese traders moving through the region. This is an opportunity. Portuguese traders sometimes carry more advanced weapons designs. More importantly, they sometimes have information about European military developments. You send an order. Find these traders, offer them hospitality, and see if they're willing to share information about their weapons in exchange for payment and access to your market. This is how you gather intelligence. Not through spying alone, but through creating networks of information gathering that use both formal and informal channels. You're building a system where information flows to you constantly. We are always learning about developments in other regions. We are always looking for new innovations to adopt or improve upon. The afternoon is consumed with this kind of strategic thinking. You're not just producing firearms. You're building an entire ecosystem around firearms. You're training soldiers to use them. You're training soldiers to maintain them. You're designing improvements. You're gathering information about alternative designs. You're creating systems for production that are efficient and scalable. You're thinking about logistics, how to provide ammunition to soldiers in the field, how to maintain supply lines, how to ensure that your soldiers never run out of ammunition when they need it. Pause. It's exhausting work, but it's the kind of exhaustion that comes with seeing your vision become real. Every completed rifle is proof that your ideas are working. Every trained soldier is proof that people can learn to use new technologies. Every improvement in the production process is proof that innovation is possible. As evening approaches, you're reviewing production numbers with your chief craftsman. They've met the 2-month deadline you set. 50 rifles are complete and ready for deployment. The craftsman is clearly proud of this accomplishment, and you acknowledge it. You tell him that his work is essential to the future of the region. You tell him that the innovations he's helping to create will change warfare. You tell him that history will remember his contribution, even if it won't remember his name. He seems satisfied by this. Perhaps he understands that working on something important is payment enough. Perhaps he understands that being part of creating the future is more valuable than personal fame. The traditional Japanese bow is elegant. The katana is beautiful and effective. The spear has proven its worth across centuries of combat. But a farmer with minimal training can be given a rifle, train for a few weeks, and become as militarily effective as a samurai who spent his entire life perfecting combat skills. This is deeply threatening to samurai culture, which is built on the idea that personal mastery and individual skill matter more than anything else. You don't care about the philosophical implications. You care about the practical implications. Whichever side adapts to firearms first will have an overwhelming advantage. So you're adapting. You're bringing in Portuguese traders to teach your men about firearms. You're creating manufacturing infrastructure to produce ammunition. You're beginning to design new tactics where firearms are integrated with traditional weapons. You run your hand along the metal of a completed rifle barrel. It's warm from the workshop. You can feel the quality of the work in the smoothness of the surface. This is what transformation looks like at the practical level. Not grand philosophical statements, but specific technical improvements, better weapons, more effective tactics, systems that work slightly better than the systems your enemies are using. 1% improvement across 1,000 soldiers equals a 10% improvement in combat effectiveness. 1% improvement in decision-making speed equals the ability to respond to enemy movements before the enemy can respond to your movements. 1% improvement in logistics, the ability to keep your troops fed and equipped slightly more efficiently, equals the ability to sustain campaigns slightly longer than your enemies can. These marginal gains accumulate. Over time, the army with marginal advantages everywhere becomes the army that wins wars, even against opponents who have slight advantages in specific areas. This is the principle you're building your entire military strategy around. Not individual brilliance, but systematic competence. Not hoping for heroes, but creating systems that make heroes unnecessary. Not relying on luck, but creating structures that minimize the role of luck. How long until you can produce 50 of these? You ask the craftsman. 3 months, he says. Perhaps 4 if the metal supply is disrupted. Make it happen in 2 months. You reply? Find additional metal suppliers if necessary. Pay whatever price is required. We need these weapons sooner than later. He nods, understanding that the deadline is non-negotiable. You move to another area of the workshop. Here, your men are practicing with firearms. They're learning how to load quickly, how to maintain accuracy, how to integrate rifle fire with traditional spear formations. The training is methodical and repetitive. Load, fire, reload, fire, load, fire. The same motions over and over until they become automatic. This is different from traditional samurai training, where the focus is on developing exceptional individual skill. This is about creating interchangeable soldiers who can perform specific functions reliably. It's about taking ordinary people and turning them into effective military units through systematic training and clear procedures. Pause. A soldier approaches you with a question. He's nervous. He's only recently joined your forces, and he's not entirely comfortable with how differently you do things compared to traditional military organizations. Lord, he says, the other soldiers, they say this rifle training is beneath them. That real samurai should focus on traditional weapons, on individual skill. You understand his concern. This is a common complaint. The Samurai Code is deeply invested in individual mastery, in the idea that your personal skill with traditional weapons is what defines you as a warrior. Firearms represent a threat to this entire system of values. Let me ask you something. You say, if you were facing an army, would you rather fight an opponent with exceptional personal combat skill or an opponent with an army that was better organized, better trained, and equipped with weapons that could kill you from a distance before you even had a chance to use your personal skill? He considers this. The answer, you continue, is that in modern warfare, individual skill doesn't matter as much as organization and collective tactics. The side that understands this first will win the wars of the future. The side that clings to tradition will lose, and then it won't matter how skilled they are because they'll be dead. It's blunt, but it's true. You spend the next several hours moving through your fortress, observing training, observing manufacturing, observing planning. Everywhere you go, you see evidence of transformation in progress. The cavalry units are being retrained to work with firearms. The logistics system is being reorganized to support larger armies on longer campaigns. The intelligence network is being expanded to provide better information about enemy movements and intentions. Each of these improvements is incremental. None of them by itself is revolutionary. But together, they're creating an army that operates on principles completely different from traditional samurai forces. They're creating the template for how the future will work. Late afternoon, you meet with your most senior commanders. They're gathered in a private chamber, seated around a table with maps and reports. The meeting is brief and focused. Information flows in. Decisions flow out. Everyone understands the chain of command, the decision-making process, the expectations for execution. This efficiency in decision-making is something you've carefully built. In traditional samurai hierarchies, decisions often take longer because there's extensive consultation, discussion of honor, consideration of tradition, and precedent. Your system is streamlined. You listen to input from your commanders, but the final decision is made quickly, and everyone understands that implementation is not optional. One commander raises concern about troop morale. Men are stressed from constant training. Men are worried about the changes to traditional warfare methods. Some of the older samurai are considering leaving your service because they're unhappy with the direction things are moving. Let them leave, you say. They're not the future anyway. The future belongs to people who can adapt, who can learn new systems, who can accept that the world is changing whether we like it or not. If people would rather die maintaining tradition than live by adapting to reality, then that's their choice. But they won't be doing it in my army. It's harsh, but you mean it. You're not interested in maintaining the comfort of people who would rather preserve the past than build the future. By the time the meeting ends, it's evening. You've made a dozen decisions that will affect the movements and preparations of thousands of soldiers. You've approved resource expenditures. You've given orders that will be implemented immediately. You've set timelines that your commanders will organize their work around. The sun is setting now, and as you walk to your fortress toward your personal quarters, you're aware of the scope of transformation underway. This fortress was, 5 years ago, a traditional samurai holding. It's becoming something different. It's becoming a machine for warfare, optimized for the conflict of the future rather than bound by the traditions of the past. People are already starting to talk about you as unusual. They whisper about your disregard for tradition, your obsession with innovation, your willingness to break with established practices. Some of them respect this. Some of them think you're insane. Most of them are waiting to see whether your innovations actually work before committing to an opinion. You'll show them. You'll show all of them. The blood comes later. But the tools of transformation are being forged now. Every rifle manufactured, every soldier trained in new tactics, every system optimized for effectiveness rather than tradition. These are the tools that will reshape Japan. You sit in meditation as the sun rises. This has been your practice for years. Beginning the day in stillness, in the presence of something larger than yourself, in connection with the spiritual discipline that you've maintained since you were a young man studying Buddhism. Your eyes are closed. Your breath is slow and steady. Your mind, which is usually filled with the calculations of warfare, with strategic considerations, with the weight of decisions that affect thousands of lives, is gradually becoming quiet. This is your contradiction. You are, at once, a Buddhist monk and a warlord. You are someone who studies philosophy and compassion, who meditates on nonviolence and the suffering inherent in existence. And you are someone who commands armies, who orders the death of enemies, who consolidates power through force. Most people can't reconcile these two identities. They see them as fundamentally incompatible. And in many ways, they're right. But you found a way to carry both simultaneously. It's not a comfortable way. It creates a kind of internal tension that never fully resolves. But it's the way you found to make sense of the world. Pause. The meditation deepens. You're aware of your body, of the cool morning air on your skin, of the sound of the fortress gradually coming alive around you. You're aware of the distance between your spiritual practice and the reality of your life. You're aware of the blood that will be shed in your name, the suffering that will result from your decisions, the families that will be destroyed in service of your ambitions. And you accept it, not happily, not without resistance. But you accept it because you understand something about the world that many people don't understand. The world contains both compassion and violence, both suffering and transcendence, both the desire for peace and the necessity of conflict. To be a complete human being, you sometimes have to hold all of these contradictions simultaneously. Your meditation ends as it always does, not with a sudden shift, but with a gradual awareness that your mind is ready to return to the world. You open your eyes. The sun is fully risen now. The fortress is alive with activity. Your commanders are waiting for you. You rise slowly. You've learned that this transition from meditation to action is important. You take a few moments to move deliberately, to acknowledge the shift from your internal world to the external demands of leadership. You change from your monk's robes into your armor. The weight of the metal is familiar. It grounds you. It reminds you that you're not just a spiritual seeker anymore. You're a warlord. You have responsibilities. Pause. Your first meeting is with your intelligence officers. They're bringing reports of enemy movements. A neighboring daimyo is consolidating power faster than expected. He's bringing smaller territories under his control through a combination of military victory and strategic alliance. He's becoming a threat. You listen to the reports with the kind of attention that most warlords don't give to intelligence gathering. You're imagining the inner lives of the people involved. You're considering the moral implications of the actions you might need to take. You're wondering, not for the first time, whether there might be a way to achieve peace without violence. But you also know the answer. There probably isn't. The warlord who's consolidating power isn't doing so out of evil intent. He's doing what warlords do. He's pursuing the same ambitions that you're pursuing. And if you don't act, if you don't consolidate your own power, if you don't prepare for conflict, then you're going to be in a position of weakness when that conflict comes. This is the knowledge that keeps you awake at night. This is a contradiction that creates the tension between your spiritual practice and your actions. Where is current troop strength? You ask. Approximately 15,000. One of the officers reports, growing by about 200 soldiers per day as he integrates newly conquered territories. And our numbers? 13,000. We could mobilize another 2,000 within 3 days if necessary. You nod, thinking, the math is close. Not a clear advantage either way. This means that any conflict would depend more on strategy and tactics than on raw numbers. This is where Nobunaga's innovations, the use of firearms, the integration of new tactics, become crucial. Pause. Let's explore diplomatic options first. You say, this surprises your officers. Most warlords will be preparing for immediate military response at this point. Send emissaries. Propose a non-aggression pact. Suggest that we could benefit from alliance rather than conflict. Your officers exchange glances. They don't understand your willingness to consider diplomacy when war seems inevitable, but they comply. The truth is more complicated than they can know. You're not opposed to war. You're not a pacifist. But you're also aware of the cost of war, aware of the human suffering that results from your decisions. And you're also aware that perhaps, just perhaps, there's a way forward that doesn't require bloodshed. You spend the rest of the morning preparing for conflict anyway. Even as you're exploring diplomatic options, you're also mobilizing your army, preparing your defenses, making strategic calculations about positioning and supply lines. You're doing both things simultaneously because you understand that diplomacy backed by military preparedness is far more effective than diplomacy backed by weakness. By afternoon, the diplomatic emissaries have returned with a response. The neighboring daimyo is willing to meet. He's also willing to consider an alliance. This is good news. This means war might be avoided. Or it means he's buying time to strengthen his position while you're distracted by diplomatic negotiations. This is also possible. In the Sengoku period, deception is a tool of warfare, and peaceful negotiations are sometimes just another form of combat. Pause. You're spending this afternoon in a different kind of work, administrative work, territory management. You're reviewing reports from the local administrators in your region. How is the harvest this year? Are there any food shortages? Are there any areas where agricultural production is down significantly? Are there any villages that might need additional support? This is not work that's usually thought of as particularly important by other warlords. They tend to focus on military matters. But you understand something that they don't understand. The people who live in your territory are the foundation of your power. If they're hungry, if they're suffering, if they're unhappy, then your power is fragile. If they're fed, if they're secure, if they're satisfied with your leadership, then your power is strong. So you pay attention to these details. You review agricultural production. You review tax collection. You review the status of infrastructure projects like roads and irrigation systems. You're trying to build a territory that's not just militarily strong, but also economically productive and stable. A report comes in about a drought in one of your provinces. Agricultural production is down by about 30%. This is a problem. People might go hungry. People might resent your leadership if they're suffering from famine. So you immediately make decisions. You authorize the release of stored grain from your warehouses to be distributed to the affected areas. You reduce the tax burden on that province for this year. You authorize work teams to improve the irrigation system so that next year's drought will have less impact. These decisions are costly. They reduce your immediate resources. But you understand that investing in the welfare of your population is investing in the strength of your territory. When the next conflict comes, when soldiers from that province are needed, they'll remember that you took care of them during the drought. They'll fight harder. They'll be more loyal. The investment will pay off. Another administrator reports on a particular village where there's been some conflict. Two families are feuding. The conflict has been escalating, and there's a risk of violence. This is exactly the kind of issue that other leaders might ignore or try to suppress through force. You do something different. You send a mediator. You attempt to help the families resolve their conflict peacefully. You work to create a situation where both families can save face while ending the feud. Pause. This approach, mediation, support for local conflict resolution, investment in local stability, is part of a longer-term strategy. You're building a territory where internal conflicts are resolved peacefully, where the population has confidence in your leadership, where people feel secure and stable. And you're doing this while also building military capacity. This is the insight that most warlords miss. The strongest territories are not necessarily the ones with the strongest armies. They're the ones where the population is stable, productive, and content with their leadership. The strongest warlords are not the ones who win through pure military force, but the ones who have both military capacity and deep support from their population. By evening, you're reviewing your long-term plans. You're thinking about where your territory will be in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years. You're imagining a future where other territories have either submitted to Nobunaga's authority or have been conquered by him. You're imagining a future where the chaos of the Sengoku period is ending and a more stable era is beginning. And you're thinking about what role you might play in that future. You're developing a reputation for being a capable administrator, for being loyal to Nobunaga, for being someone who can consolidate territories and keep them stable and productive. This reputation is valuable. It's opening doors. It's creating opportunities. It's positioning you for larger responsibilities when the time comes. You return to meditation in the evening. After a full day of decisions and logistics and strategic planning, you need to return to your spiritual practice. You need to remind yourself of the larger context, of the reality that exists beyond the immediate concerns of power and territory. As you sit in stillness, you're thinking about the nature of change, about the way the world is being transformed by men like you and Nabinaga and Hideyoshi. You're thinking about the blood that will be shed, regardless of whether you make peace with this particular neighbor. You're thinking about the suffering that's inherent to the transformation of a nation. And you're also thinking about what might come after the transformation. You're imagining a Japan that's unified, where the chaos ends, where people can build lives with some degree of security and stability. You're imagining that the blood you're shedding might ultimately result in something good. It doesn't justify the suffering, but it contextualizes it. The meditation is deeper this evening than it was this morning. Your mind is quieter. You've made peace for now with the contradiction between your spiritual practice and your actions. You understand that the world requires both compassion and violence, both the Buddhist monk and the warlord, and you're committed to holding both identities as authentically as you can. You're watching Nabinaga consolidate power. You're observing his innovations, his willingness to break with tradition, his capacity to inspire loyalty in his subordinates. And you're learning. Everything Nabinaga does, you're learning from. Every decision he makes, you're analyzing and understand not just the immediate tactical outcome, but the longer-term strategic implications. This is your genius. You understand that you don't need to be the one making all the innovations. You need to be the one who learns fastest from the innovations of others. You need to be the one who can observe, understand, and then improve upon what you've observed. You were born a hostage. This is your fundamental reality. You spent your childhood as a hostage, knowing that your survival depended on the goodwill of your captors, understanding that your value was purely instrumental. This taught you something fundamental: patience. You learned that sometimes the person who wins is not the person who moves first, but the person who moves last, who waits until the moment is exactly right, who understands that timing is everything. Pause. Now, as an adult, you're serving Nabinaga. You're one of his most trusted commanders. You're leading forces in his army. You're participating in his campaigns. And you're watching, always watching. You're understanding how he thinks, how he makes decisions, what he values in his subordinates. You're also noticing his weaknesses, his arrogance, his tendency to make enemies of people who might have been allies, his inability to see that the people around him might have their own ambitions, his assumption that loyalty to him will always be absolute. You wonder about this sometimes. You wonder what would happen if someone close to him decided to pursue their own agenda instead of serving his vision. You wonder what the balance point is between loyalty and personal ambition. This is not a question you're asking openly. This is a question you're asking only in the privacy of your own mind. Because your position depends on appearing absolutely loyal to Nabinaga while secretly developing your own capacity for independent action. You're serving as governor of the Makawa region, a position of responsibility that also gives you access to resources. You're building your own power base while appearing to serve Nabinaga's vision. You're creating a network of subordinates who are loyal to you personally, not just to Nabinaga through you. You're positioning yourself for a future where you might not be serving Nabinaga. Pause. The patience is the key to everything. Other ambitious men would be too eager. They would try to move too quickly toward independent power. They would challenge Nabinaga directly, try to take territory, try to build alliances that would threaten his authority. And Nabinaga would destroy them, just as he destroys anything that threatens his power. But you're not challenging him. You're serving him. You're appearing to be exactly what he wants, a loyal, capable subordinate who executes his vision without question. And while you're appearing to be this, you're also slowly building the infrastructure for an independent power base. This is a high wire act. One misstep, and Nabinaga will realize what you're doing. He'll see you as a threat, and he'll destroy you, just as he destroys all threats. But you're good at this kind of balance. You've been training for it your entire life. Your childhood as a hostage was the ultimate training in how to survive in a hostile environment, how to maintain appearances while protecting your own interests, how to understand the minds of powerful people and give them what they need. A messenger arrives with a report from the capital. Nabinaga is consolidating power more aggressively now. He's destroying any resistance. He's burning temples that don't submit to his authority. He's eliminating families that threaten his power base. He's becoming more ruthless, more willing to use violence as a tool for achieving his objectives. You read the report with a complex mix of emotions. You admire Nabinaga's willingness to do what's necessary. You understand that this is what unification requires. But you're also aware that this level of ruthlessness creates enemies. This level of aggressiveness creates people who would like to see him destroyed. And when the right moment comes, when Nabinaga is vulnerable, when people who've been hurt by him are ready to act, that's when a person with patience and intelligence can step forward and consolidate power in ways that aren't available when the leader is still strong. Pause. You're not hoping for Nabinaga's death. You're not plotting against him. You're simply being realistic about the fact that leaders don't last forever. That moment of opportunity arrives unpredictably, and that being prepared for those moments is the key to long-term success. The evening settles in. You're alone with your thoughts, moving through your castle, observing the routines that your subordinates are maintaining. Everything is running smoothly. Your army is well-trained. Your territory is productive. Your administration is efficient. You're building something that will survive, that will endure even if you're suddenly removed from power or if your position changes dramatically. This is the fundamental difference between you and Nabinaga. Nabinaga is building a personal empire, a system where his individual genius is the linchpin that holds everything together. You're building structures. You're creating systems that will function independently of any individual person. You're thinking about legacy in a way that Nabinaga isn't. In the privacy of your quarters, you're imagining a future where the Sengoku period has ended, where Japan is unified, where stability has replaced chaos. You're imagining what role you might play in that future. You're wondering if perhaps, through patience, through careful positioning, through the ability to observe and learn and wait for the right moment, you might be the one who ultimately consolidates power in a unified Japan. It's a remarkable ambition, but you've learned to hold remarkable ambitions while appearing to have no ambitions at all. You've learned to move toward your goals while appearing to move in a completely different direction. The patience is the key to everything. The Battle of Okahazama happens in 1560. This is where everything changes. This is where Nabinaga proves that his innovations work, that his willingness to break with tradition actually translates into military success. This is where the Sengoku period begins its trajectory toward unification. Your enemy is Imagawa Yoshimoto. He's a major daimyo, a powerful warlord with significant military resources. He's been consolidating power in central Japan. He's accumulated territory, built alliances, and created an army that's far larger than Nabinaga's forces. By traditional measures, this should be an easy victory for Yoshimoto. His forces are larger, better positioned, better resourced. Everything suggests that Nabinaga should lose. But everything suggests this only if you're thinking about warfare in the traditional way. If you understand that innovation can overcome traditional advantages, the calculus changes completely. Pause. Nabinaga learns that Yoshimoto is resting with his army, that they're celebrating early victory, that they're overconfident. This is the moment. This is when most warlords would wait, would prepare a more formal response, would try to match Yoshimoto's force through conventional means. Nabinaga does the opposite. He attacks immediately. He attacks during a thunderstorm, when visibility is poor and traditional range weapons are less effective. The intelligence reports describe the chaos of the battle. Yoshimoto's army is confused. The larger force is unable to coordinate effectively because they're scattered, because visibility is poor, because they're unprepared for an immediate assault. Nabinaga's force, smaller and weaker by traditional measures, is coordinated and purposeful. They know where they're going. They know what they're doing. The battle lasts hours. Bodies accumulate. Smoke fills the air. The chaos is absolute and consuming. And in the middle of this chaos, Yoshimoto is killed. The larger force, suddenly without clear leadership, begins to collapse. Nabinaga's forces press their advantage. What should have been a defeat becomes a stunning victory. After Okahazama, everything changes. Other daimyo who dismissed you before are now paying attention. Your subordinates, who might have been questioning your methods, are now believing in the transformation you've been building. Your innovations have proven themselves effective. Your willingness to break with tradition has resulted in military success. Pause. The aftermath of Okahazama is where the blood becomes real, not the abstract blood of historical narratives, but the actual physical blood, the actual suffering of wounded soldiers, the actual grief of families that have lost members. Walking through the battlefield after the battle is an experience that most people only have once, if they're forced to have it at all. The land is transformed. Where there was grass and space and possibility, there's now wreckage. Bodies are scattered across the landscape. Some are still alive, but suffering terribly from wounds that will likely become infected. Some are completely still. Soldiers are moving through the aftermath, looking for comrades, trying to identify the dead, try to understand what happened. You're observing a widow kneeling over the body of what must be her husband. She's making a sound, not quite crying, not quite screaming, but something between the two. Her son is standing next to her, too young to fully understand what happened, but old enough to know that something has changed fundamentally. Pause. You want to say something to comfort them. You want to explain that this death was necessary, that it served a larger purpose, that it was part of the transformation of a nation. But you understand that these explanations would be obscene in this context. There's no explanation that makes sense to a woman who has just lost her husband. There's no explanation that justifies her suffering. So you move on. You continue through the battlefield. You observe the evidence of the violence. You see the broken weapons. You see the blood that is dried on the ground. You see the places where the most intense fighting occurred, where the ground has been churned up by hundreds of people struggling against each other. And you're thinking about what this means. You're thinking about the fact that this is going to continue. This is going to become the normal reality for the next 50 years. Battlefields like this are going to become common. Widows like the one you just saw are going to become numerous. Orphans are going to become a regular feature of the landscape. Pause. By evening, you're sitting with Nabinaga, reviewing the aftermath of the battle. Nabinaga is in a good mood. He's satisfied with the victory. He's already planning the next move. He's already thinking about how to use his victory to consolidate more power. You listen to him explain his strategy. You understand it. It makes logical sense. But you're also aware of the cost. You're aware of the families that have been destroyed. You're aware of the futures that have been erased. You're aware that the price of this victory is being paid by people who had nothing to do with the decisions that led to the battle. But you also understand that stopping now wouldn't change anything. The battle has already happened. The people are already dead. Refusing to continue would just mean that their deaths were in vain. So you accept Nabinaga's strategic plans. You prepare for the next campaign. You begin to think about how to use this momentum to achieve additional military objectives. This is the moment when you understand something fundamental about power. Once you start down a particular path, it's almost impossible to turn back. Once you've ordered deaths, once you've destroyed families, once you've tasted victory through violence, you're locked into a trajectory. The only way forward is to continue. The only way to make the cost acceptable is to achieve results that seem worth those costs. Power weighs more than anyone expects. It weighs more than the physical objects, the territories conquered, the castles built, the armies commanded. The weight is in the decisions. It's in the knowledge that what you choose affects the lives of millions of people. It's in the awareness that you can't ever make everyone happy, that any decision you make will hurt some people, that the responsibility for suffering is partly yours. Oda Nabinaga carries this weight. It shows in his face as he gets older. The man who was so certain about the future, so confident in his innovations, begins to understand something darker. Unification requires not just innovation, but also violence, cruelty, the willingness to destroy anyone who resists. He orders the burning of Mount Hai. Mount Hai is a major Buddhist monastery, one of the most important religious institutions in Japan. The monastery is defended by warrior monks who've taken up arms to defend their religious institution. Nabinaga recognizes that this is a direct threat to his unification project. Religious authorities are claiming that they have the right to resist secular authority. This cannot be allowed to stand. This threatens the entire structure of power that he's trying to build. So he orders the monastery burned. Thousands of people die. Monks, civilians, people who've lived their entire lives in this religious community. The destruction is complete and deliberate. It's meant to be a message. If you resist, this is what happens. Pause. Nobunaga doesn't do this lightly. He knows what it costs. But he also knows that it's necessary. He's reached a point where maintaining power and pursuing unification requires actions that violate every principle of honor and morality that he was raised with. He's becoming someone different. He's becoming someone who can order the deaths of thousands. And he understands that he'll carry this for the rest of his life. This is when the weight of power becomes truly unbearable. Not because you're morally troubled, though you are, but because you understand that you're transforming yourself through your own actions. You're becoming someone different. You're becoming someone who can order the deaths of thousands, and the weight of that knowledge never goes away. Toyotomi Hideyoshi faces a slightly different version of this problem. He's consolidating Nobunaga's legacy and continuing the unification project, but he's doing it differently. Hideyoshi is more politically subtle. He tries diplomacy before warfare. He tries to negotiate before he destroys. But when negotiation fails, when a daimyo refuses to submit to his authority, he's willing to do what's necessary. He lays siege to Takatenjin. A daimyo refuses to submit. Hideyoshi could simply accept this and fight a prolonged war against this one holdout. Instead, he chooses to make an example. He takes the enemy commander's family. He has them executed in front of the castle walls, visible to the defenders inside. The message is clear. Resistance means your family dies. This is effective from a military standpoint. It breaks the will of the defenders. The siege ends. The daimyo submits. But Hideyoshi carries the knowledge of what he did. He ordered the execution of women and children to break the morale of people defending a castle. He violated every principle of honor, every moral code he was raised with, to achieve a military objective. Pause. And he understands, in the quiet of the evening when he's alone, that he's becoming someone different. He's becoming someone capable of ordering these acts. He's becoming someone willing to violate human compassion in service of political goals. Tokugawa Ieyasu is different in his response to this weight. Ieyasu was born as a hostage, which means his entire childhood was defined by powerlessness, by the knowledge that he could be executed at any moment as a political tool. This creates a different kind of consciousness about power. He's not traumatized by it exactly, but he's realistic about it. He understands that power is violent, that force is a foundation of authority, that unification requires sacrifice. But Ieyasu is also the survivor. He lives longer than Nobunaga. He outlasts Hideyoshi. He's the one who ultimately consolidates the unification that the others have been working toward. And the way he carries the weight of power is different. He doesn't seem tormented by it the way Nobunaga becomes. He's accepting of it. He understands that this is the price of unification, and he's willing to pay it. This doesn't make Ieyasu a good person. It makes him a different kind of person. Someone who can order violent acts without the emotional aftermath that torments Nobunaga. Someone who can consolidate power through ruthlessness while appearing to be civilized and measured. Someone who understands power as an amoral tool for achieving objectives. Usuji Kenshin carries the weight differently still. Kenshin is a Buddhist monk who becomes a warlord. He carries both the spiritual weight and the political weight. He studied Buddhism. He understands concepts like compassion and nonviolence, but he's also commanding armies, ordering the deaths of enemies, consolidating power through force. Kenshin manages this internal contradiction partly through compartmentalization. When he's not leading armies, he practices Buddhism seriously. He meditates. He considers philosophy. He tries to live according to Buddhist principles. But when he's on the battlefield, he sets aside these principles and does what's necessary to win. This creates an internal split that's perhaps more psychologically damaging than the other approaches. But it also creates something remarkable. A person who can be both ruthless and philosophical, both warrior and spiritual seeker. Kenshin is the most interesting psychologically precisely because he's never fully resolved the contradiction between these two aspects of his identity. Pause. By the time you reach this point in history, the latter decades of the Sengoku period, all four of these men have understood something fundamental. The transformation of Japan is costing them their humanity, each in their own way, each dealing with it differently. but all of them understanding that becoming the person who reshapes history requires sacrificing parts of yourself. This is the weight that they carry, not visible in their faces necessarily, though it shows for some of them, not obvious in their actions necessarily, though it colors every decision they make, but present nonetheless. The knowledge that they're the architects of unification, and that this architecture is built partly on a foundation of blood, cruelty, and the violation of every principle they were taught as children about honor and morality. The evidence of this weight is scattered throughout their lives. It appears in the decisions they make about mercy. It appears in the moments when they show hesitation about actions that military logic dictates they should take. It appears in the times when they retreat from power temporarily, seeking spiritual renewal or simple rest. But mostly it appears in the choices they make to continue anyway, to press forward despite the weight, to maintain their commitment to unification despite understanding the cost, to accept that they're becoming different people, that they're sacrificing part of themselves because the vision of a unified Japan seems important enough to justify that sacrifice. Pause. This is the most profound cost of their ambition, not the deaths they order, though those are real, not the territories conquered, though those matter, but the internal transformation, the gradual understanding that you become someone you didn't intend to become, the knowledge that you can never be who you were before, the awareness that power has transformed you, and the transformation is permanent. The weight becomes heavier as they age. Nobunaga shows signs of cracking under the pressure. He becomes more brutal, more willing to use excessive violence, more prone to sudden rages. He's losing the capacity to manage the emotional weight of what he's doing. Hideyoshi, by contrast, seems to handle the weight through a kind of compartmentalization. When he's making military decisions, he's ruthless. When he's administering territories, he's focused on building systems and structures. He separates the different aspects of his work so that he's not carrying all the emotional weight at once. Tokugawa Ieyasu handles it through patience. He observes what works and what doesn't work. He sees Nobunaga's brutality beginning to create resistance. He sees Hideyoshi's administrative genius beginning to create stability. He learns from both of them, and he begins to think about what he would do differently if he were in their position. Usuji Kenshin handles it through meditation and spiritual practice. He retreats into Buddhism. He finds spiritual meaning in the cycle of warfare and peace. He constructs a philosophical framework that allows him to accept the violence as part of a larger cosmic pattern. These different approaches to managing the weight of power, through compartmentalization, through observation and learning, through spiritual practice, through increasingly brutal expression, they create 4 different kinds of warlords. And over time, it becomes clear that some approaches are more sustainable than others. You're old now. You're very old by the standards of this era. You've outlived Nobunaga by decades. You've outlived Hideyoshi. You've outlived Kenshin. You're Tokugawa Ieyasu, and you're watching the world that you helped transform settling into stability. The chaos is over. The constant warfare is finished. The regional conflicts that once seemed permanent are now history. A person can travel from one end of Japan to another without encountering warfare. Commerce can occur without bandits or regional conflicts disrupting it. The future is becoming predictable in a way that was impossible 50 years ago. Pause. You're sitting by a window, looking out at a landscape that's peaceful. The architecture around you reflects the stability that's been achieved. Where 50 years ago, every structure was built for defense or military purposes, now there are gardens. There are spaces for aesthetic pleasure. There are communities organized around commerce and culture rather than warfare. The transformation is nearly complete. Not perfectly. There's never perfect stability in human societies, but functional. The system you, Hideyoshi, and Nobunaga built is beginning to operate on its own momentum. It doesn't require constant leadership anymore. It requires administration and maintenance, but stable enough that it will survive even after you're gone. This realization brings a kind of peace. You've spent your entire life pursuing this. You've made decisions that haunted you. You've ordered deaths. You've destroyed families and regions. You violated every principle of mercy in service of this vision. And now, at the end of your life, you can see that it worked. The transformation is real and functional. The blood that was shed, the sacrifices that were made, the violence that was necessary, it was not in vain. It resulted in something real. It resulted in a stable nation. It resulted in an era where human creativity and culture could flourish because people weren't constantly fighting for survival. Pause. You think about Nobunaga. He would have enjoyed seeing this. He would have enjoyed understanding that his innovations worked, that his vision was correct, that the future did indeed belong to those who could break with tradition and adapt to new possibilities. But Nobunaga didn't live to see it. He was assassinated before the unification was complete, before the vision was fully realized. You think about Hideyoshi. He would have been satisfied with the administrative structures, with the way the territories are organized, with how efficiently the unified nation operates. Hideyoshi was brilliant at implementation, at taking Nobunaga's grand vision and creating the practical systems that made it functional. He understood something about governance that Nobunaga sometimes missed, that building something is harder than destroying it, that maintaining stability requires different skills than creating transformation. You think about Kenshin. He would have been meditating. He would have been finding spiritual meaning in the cycle of warfare and peace, in the transformation of the nation, in the cosmic significance of these events. Kenshin carried a different kind of wisdom that came from trying to reconcile the spiritual and the material, the peaceful and the violent. And you think about yourself. You're satisfied in a way that the others perhaps couldn't be. You've lived long enough to see the full arc of transformation. You've lived long enough to watch the new system stabilize and begin to operate independently. You've lived long enough to pass power to your successors and to begin the process of removing yourself from the center of power. Pause. The evening is settling in now. The light is fading. The world is transitioning from activity to rest, from day to night, from action to reflection. You're feeling the weight of age, but it's a different weight than the weight of power was. It's the weight of accumulated experience, of understanding how things actually work, of having lived through one of the greatest transformations in human history. The cost was high. Hundreds of thousands of deaths. Families destroyed. Culture suppressed. Regional identities erased in service of national identity. Traditions broken. The old order dismantled completely. All of this happened, and you were responsible for some of it, directly or indirectly. But the result is a nation that will survive, that will prosper, that will eventually become one of the great powers of the world. The result is that human creativity and commerce will flourish in ways that wasn't possible during the chaos of the Sengoku period. The result is stability, predictability, and the possibility of building something permanent. Pause. You're thinking now about how this will be remembered. You wonder if future generations will understand what was required to achieve this transformation. You wonder if they'll judge the methods harshly or if they'll recognize them as necessary. You suspect they'll do both. They'll judge and they'll understand. They'll criticize and they'll appreciate the results. This is fine with you. You're old enough to understand that no one gets to control their own historical legacy. Your actions will speak for themselves. The students of history will interpret them as they choose. Some will see Nobunaga, Hideyoshi, Kenshin, and you as great unifiers, brilliant visionaries who transformed a nation. Others will see you as brutal warlords who destroyed the old culture in service of centralized power. Both perspectives will be true. The beauty and the horror are inseparable. The transformation required violence, and the violence is real and it matters. But the transformation also resulted in something positive, and that matters too. Pause. The servants bring tea. You drink it slowly, savoring the warmth, the simplicity, the momentary peace of sitting quietly as the world settles into evening. Tomorrow there will be administrative work. There will be decisions to make. There will be governance to maintain. But tonight, you can rest. You're thinking about something that no one would have thought to predict 50 years ago. You're thinking about how this era will eventually be remembered not primarily for the warfare and blood, but for the culture that emerged from it. The poetry, the painting, the theater, the gardens, all of these things are going to flourish because the political foundations have been stabilized. Future generations are going to create art and beauty in the stable nation that was built through blood. And there's something important about that. Not that it justifies the blood exactly, but that it shows the complex nature of historical transformation. Violence and brutality create the conditions for beauty and culture. Chaos is broken so that order can emerge. The old is destroyed so that the new can be built. This isn't a comfortable moral equation. It never will be, but it's true. Pause. As the night deepens and the servants prepare your sleeping chamber, you're at peace in a way that you perhaps never thought you'd be. You spent your entire life in conflict. You've spent your entire life in pursuit of power and stability. And now, at the end of your life, you've achieved it. Not perfectly, not without cost, but achieved nonetheless. And you understand something that most people never understand in their lifetime, that great change always requires great sacrifice, that transformation always has a cost in human suffering, that the stable, beautiful world you're looking at was built on a foundation of violence that can never be fully redeemed or justified, but which was perhaps necessary to break the cycle of chaos and allow something new to emerge. You think of the four masters one final time. Oda Nobunaga, who broke the old system. Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who built the new one. Yasuji Kenshin, who carried the spiritual weight. And yourself, Tokugawa Ieyasu, who survived long enough to consolidate it all. The blood shaped Japan. The ambition transformed a nation. And the cost was written in the lives of hundreds of thousands. But the result, a unified, stable, prosperous Japan, is undeniable. Pause. Sleep now. Your work is complete. The blood has dried. The age of warfare is ending. A new era is beginning. And you, Tokugawa Ieyasu, and before you Oda Nobunaga and Toyotomi Hideyoshi and Yasuji Kenshin, you'll be remembered as the men who shaped Japan with ambition, vision, and yes, with blood. The transformation is complete. The nation continues. And you can finally rest, knowing that what you built will outlast you, will endure, will carry forward the legacy of these centuries of conflict and change. The four masters, the Sengoku period, the blood, the transformation, the vision, it all matters. It all weighs. It all continues. Sleep well. The masters have done their work. Japan sleeps peacefully tonight because four ordinary men became extraordinary, became legends, became the architects of an entire nation's future. Like and subscribe our channel and comment also. Sleep well.